Nan Tynberg of the Palm Springs Public Library's Local History Project. I am here today with Clara and William Veith. The Veiths moved to Palm Springs in the early 40s when Bill took over as Indian agent from resigning agent Quackenbush. We are in Palm Springs, and today's date is April 25th, 1987. And Bill and Clara, before I begin, I'd like to show off Bill's wonderful beadwork. He gave me a necklace, and I hope he doesn't mind that I say he's 90 years old and still doing this wonderful beadwork. Bill, I mentioned that you were 90 and doing this wonderful beadwork, and you corrected me. You'll be 90 in November, and we want to be very accurate on that. It is still a remarkable achievement, your wonderful arts and crafts, the work that you do. I wanted to go back to, Bill, your roots. Your parents were were Indian agents as well.
Indian service. They were in Indian service.
Okay. Do you want to tell me where they were from and what they did?
Well, my father was born in Baltimore, Maryland. My mother was born in Atlantic City in Georgia. I guess it's Georgia, yeah, down in Georgia. And they met in Virginia. She was born in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, which is quite a nice place. We've been there. And she grew up there, and she met my father, and they were married many, many years ago.
You had a wonderful story about Jim Thorpe.
Oh, yes, yes. My father was working for a very well-to-do man in Catonsville, Maryland, and someone suggested that he put in an application as the head gardener, taking care of all the lawns, the trees, and the shrubs at the Carlisle Indian School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And so he had an interview with the superintendent, and they said, I think we can use you, and he went to work there from 1909 to 1912 at Sherman Institute. Then we left and came out, transferred. My dad was transferred to the Sherman Institute school in Riverside.
Right. Now, how did he know Jim Thorpe? By just working in Carlisle, Pennsylvania?
Back at Carlisle, Pennsylvania, there were about 1,200 Indians registered, and they came from pretty near every state in the Union as far as that was concerned. But Jim Thorpe was a young fellow around about 18 or 19 years of age, and he was from the Southwest. Mm-hmm. And when I came home from school, I would go up and see him, and he and I would practice. I'd run around the track and jump the hurdles and broad jump. And when we were playing lacrosse, well, I'd be on the other side of the field with a racket and a ball, and I used to play and run with him.
Was he obviously as talented as
he was so talented, yes. As you know. He became the decathlon,
yes,
of the Olympics. Nothing could overcome. I mean, he could outrun anyone. He could do anything, and when it comes to athletics, that you want. Everything.
You said that your mother was involved in Indian service,
yes,
as well. What
when,
did she
when
do?
We came out to Arlington, of course that's where the Indian school is, but it's known as Riverside. Why, my mother had an opportunity to help out in the kitchen, so she became the baker lady.
Oh, I see.
Cooking bread and making cakes and cookies and everything for the Indians. There was about 1,200 Indians registered there, mostly from, say, about 10 years of age up to, well, wherever you leave school, maybe it'd be 25, 30.
You're talking about Riverside now.
Yeah, I'm talking about Sherman Institute.
Right, and this was what year approximately?
Well, we went there in 1912. And we were there 6.5 years.
I see. Now, Clara, you are from Riverside. That's where
Yes,
you were
I'm a
born.
native Californian.
Native Riverside County person.
Yes.
That's wonderful. When did you meet? How did you meet Bill, and
When
under what
he
circumstances?
when he came, his family came to Riverside, Arlington School. We went to. He was in the 7th grade, and I was in the 7th grade.
So you
So
knew each
we
other as youngsters.
we went in the last 2 years of grammar school together.
And what year were you married?
In 1924.
I see. I see. Bill, you talked about being an agent and doing work at La Mesa Reservation.
Yes. You see, when
What were your duties?
Well, in La Mesa followed just a little bit of when I joined the Mission Indian Agency. I took an examination and I was employed by the superintendent to go down to La Mesa because the government under CWA or WPA, one of the two, the government allowed certain money, and on the reservations we built them homes and we built churches, and my main work was at the Barren Long Indian Reservation up near Alpine, and that belonged to Mr. Grant, who owned the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles, and we bought the whole property from him for $125,000. He left all the thoroughbred horses. He had a racetrack. He left all the farming equipment.
When you say we bought the property, the Bureau of
The
Indian
government.
Affairs? The
Yeah, you
government.
see,
The government.
if I go back a little bit, these Indians that I was dealing with
Yes.
lived on the El Capitan Reservation outside of Lakeside. The San Diego County decided that that would be a good place to erect a dam. So they got together with the government and they got together with the Indians, and they purchased the land or put up the money in escrow for these Indians that lived on the Captain Grandy Reservation. However, there was a little faction there. They weren't all together on where they wanted to live when they left the reservation.
I see.
But there was a cemetery, which was quite a thorn in the flesh, because a cemetery to an Indian is very sacred.
Yes, and we will talk
And
about that later.
the water eventually, when the dam filled up, would cover up the graveyard,
I see.
and they wouldn't go for that. So we had a man in San Diego, he was an undertaker, and we made a deal, contract with him and the Indians, and the chief from the two different factions of the Captain Grandy Indian Reservation got together, and we made a deal, and he moved all the bodies from one place in Verona, that was one of the reservations
Yes.
we purchased in Lakeside, and the one at Barren Long, and we moved all the bodies out of the cemetery up to the cemetery on
Were you
each one.
physically involved in doing
Oh
that
yeah,
as well?
sure, because I was there when they were, and then right after I got the cemetery all put together with all, there was people that were, they didn't have coffin in those days, they just made a pine box.
Yes.
And when we went to take them out of the Captain Grandy graveyard, they were one on top of the other. But the Indians were right there and said, that's my baby, that's my father, that's my mother, that's my sister. And they just took them up to the reservation on each one of the places and just put them in there, and there was no trouble at all.
It must
Wonderful.
have been it's obviously a very important memory that
Oh
you
my
have.
gracious. We never had any fuss, no trouble, because everybody knew their own relatives,
Amazing.
even though maybe they've been in there 10 or 15
Yes,
years.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah.
Yes. Did you ever meet, I don't know Quackenbush's first name. He's been mentioned several times. Doesn't really matter.
Oh,
He was the agent.
Yes,
here. Did you
he
ever
was-
meet him or?
Oh yes,
Oh,
yes,
work
sure.
with
He
him.
used to come in. See, I was located in the Mission Agency office in Riverside in the courthouse. There's where the headquarters for the Mission Agency, and they were control over 31 reservations in 4 counties.
Yes.
And I happened to be the clerk, and the superintendent, John W. Dady, decided to turn the group of the Captain Grandy Indian Reservation Indians over to me for
I see.
relocation.
I see.
And so that's what I did.
And when were you actually called upon to come to Palm Springs?
Well, I was down in San Diego now, as I say, it was in Santa La Mesa, and I built 26 houses on the Barren Long Indian Reservation and a beautiful church. Oh, it was a beautiful church, tile roof, beautiful inside. And so when I finished that project, they called me back to come back to another assignment, which was the Agua Caliente Band of Mission Indians in Palm Springs.
I see. And this was 42, did you say?
That was January the 1st, 1942, I took over.
I see. Now, you have given me a wonderful overview of the Agua Caliente as you found them when you came in 1942. And you mentioned that this was a band of Indians, not a tribe.
Yeah.
And you did say one of 31 involved in the mission Indian agency.
They had 31 agencies in the...
How many adults do you
when I came here, there were 40 adults and 79 minors. They all came over from 29 Palms.
Yes. Now this is very interesting because no one else has mentioned the fact that this group of Indians were really descendants of the 29 Palms Indians that you found when you were here. When you came in 42, these were not descendants of the little group, the band of Indians that people in the last century found when they
but all those Indians that were at 29 Palms all came over here. They put a fence around the cemetery, and it's still there, just like that. No one there.
So, but the Indians that you met and knew and you were part of here in 42 were descendants, or really the 29?
They came over. They all came over here.
That's
yes.
interesting.
And it was I don't know whether you are going to ask me or if you want to know about how we arrived at the sections in Palm Springs. I think you have it on your notes.
Yes, that is written up. But you did give just a ballpark figure. You did talk about how much acreage
yes,
we were talking about in 42 when you arrived.
In Palm Springs, when I came here, there was 31,164 approximately acres. That's about 8.5 sections. Now the sections in Palm Springs, when the railroad came through here in 1886, they came through here. 1886, pardon me.
That's okay.
And the railroad had control of all those sections, and the government decided that they would give the Indians the even sections, like 18, 22, and all
14.
that. Section 14. Yeah, 14 is the main one. Then two gentlemen at that time, one was Judge McCallum. The other was
at that time.
Yes,
yeah.
And Francis Stevens was the other. Now the dividing line between them was Alejo. Everything south of Alejo was purchased, the odd numbers, by Mr. McCallum. The north of that was purchased by Francis Stevens. He was an old timer here, and he purchased all the sections north of Alejo.
Yes.
And
would that have been P.T. Stevens?
What is that?
P.T.
Yeah, P.T. Yeah, yes.
Francis
That's
was
Culver
his wife.
Nichols' father-in-law.
Yeah.
And at that time, the acreage was worth about $5 an acre.
Yes, that's wonderful overview.
Some difference now.
I want to bring Clara into this a little bit. You moved here in 42, and you had 3 children
yes,
at the time?
Three children.
Where did you first live?
We lived there at the where the Indian bathhouse was, there on Indian Avenue, in the adobe house there.
Right next door to the bathhouse.
Right next to the bathhouse.
Where the spa is now.
Yes.
What was your house like?
Well, it was a adobe brick house. It was a real old house, and the office was in the front room of the house. Front part of the house was Bill's office,
I see.
And then we lived in the back part of it, right there next to the old bathhouse.
Right. And you had 3 children at the time?
We had 3 children, one in grammar school, one in junior high, and one in high school.
And how did they get to school? They
walked.
Yeah.
They walked. There was no bus
far.
then.
Yeah. It's not, well, it wasn't far to grammar school.
No. we went down to Francis Stevens School, but of course Nellie Kaufman and the high school were farther out.
That's true.
But
Yes.
children walked to school in those
Yes,
days.
and the high school had just been in operation since '38, so they were able to
Yes.
take advantage of not being bused to Banning. Describe, Clara. I want you to describe the bathhouse. You were next door to the operation. Do you?
Well, the hot pool, of course, was the natural hot pool that had come up out of the ground, and they had built this square, almost a square building, wooden building, around this pool, and the inside was divided into 4 sections. There was 2 cross sections in it, 4 places so that 4 people could take a bath at the same time into the hot water. And we had an Indian girl that had charge of the bathhouse under Bill's supervision, of course. And then we also had a masseuse that was there that took special appointments for a masseuse. But we had the Indians use the bathhouse, the working people used the bathhouse, we had regular residents use the bathhouse, and then of course we had quite a few celebrities that used to come in and use the bathhouse.
Do you remember any of the celebrities?
No, I didn't have much to do with that part of it. I was
you were being domestic at home.
Yes.
You had a lot to take care of.
I didn't really have any actual business with the workings of it.
Bill, why don't then I ask you exactly how it worked? Do you remember what the masseuse would cost, for example, approximately?
We had a masseuse that had quite a clientele. In other words, you had to get an appointment to be with her because
it was a woman.
she would
Yes,
have them. You wouldn't stay in the water more than 10 minutes.
Yes.
I cautioned them because
Do you
if they
recall how hot it was?
106 degrees, it came up out of the ground.
Warm.
Yeah, and if you stay in there, especially if you drink 2 glasses of water from the pump that was outside, it just made you perspire, and that was the best thing in the world because all the poison came out through the pores. But she would have them in there 10 minutes, and then she would take them in her room, and then she'd give them a nice massage.
Do you recall how much the bath?
Oh, I mentioned we charged
cost?
them 50 cents to go in the bath. That's all we charged them.
Yes, because in the
But
20s, I believe it was 25 cents, so it had gone up a quarter.
Yeah, well, but what they had actually paid her, I don't know that.
Yes.
But here's one interesting thing about the bath. Originally, the hole where the water came up was in the middle of Tockwitz, about 100 feet east of Indian Avenue.
Yes, that's interesting.
The Indians from up at the Kauai Indian Reservation up on the hill here going to Idlewild, 74 highway, and the Kauai and the Santa Rosa Indians would come down, you see, in the wintertime and stay down here because there was snow up there. But the children would go in swimming, and their mothers would wrap a rope around them and let them go out so that they wouldn't get lost. Now, they wouldn't go down in the water more than up to your neck because the water is just like a cork. You just bounce right back up.
Because of the minerals?
Well, somehow or another, many, many years before we went there, the water changed over to where it is right now, see, and that's about maybe 100 or 125 feet north of where it was before.
Yes.
And it just came up. We sounded the hole. We went down 600 feet. We never hit bottom.
Incredible.
And the water never stopped. It always changed. I mean, always was the same amount. And the sad part of it is the water that we didn't use went out through a pipe and went down to the reservation out into the desert. It just disappeared, all that water.
Yes, it could.
Now, you see, with the spa there,
Yes.
they're taking advantage of that because that water is being pumped into a 10,000-gallon reservoir. And when you go in to take a bath, they just turn the faucet on. The hot water comes right over to where you are. You have your bath, and then
So it's
the
been
masseuse.
channeled. Yes.
Yeah, it's altogether different now.
Yes,
And,
that's interesting.
yes,
Bit
it's
of
very
history
interesting.
that we
But
don't know.
many times, and around different places, the Palm Springs, people have tried to find hot water, but they can't do it. All the hot water, except for that one, is up at Desert Hot Springs. There's where they got
Yes.
all the water. And that water up there is maybe in some places 180 degrees it comes out of the ground.
Oh my.
Scald you.
So as far as Palm Springs, it was that gold mine right there
Oh
in
my,
that
my,
area.
my. The Indians used that money. You see, that was part of their income,
Yes.
as well as going into going up into the
Yes.
canyons.
Now, at this time, they did not yet have full access to utilizing their land as far as renting. So their income was the bathhouse and the canyons.
And the canyon.
How did the canyon work?
Now,
How did that work?
you see, it so happened that when the government allotted the sections to the Indians, those those canyons like Palm Canyon, Murray Canyon, Andreas Canyon, Tockwitz Canyon, Tachiva, and Chena were all on even sections, so they just inherited. Now they had that as a fee patent now. See, they never had control where they could dispose of it at that time.
Of course.
The allotments came later,
Controversy,
but they got money out of the going up into the canyon. They charged.
So was there someone who manned the station at the canyon the way they do now, and that's how they derived visitor fees to the canyon?
Oh yes, they have it fenced now, so that you have to go through a gate, and every morning the Indians are there early, and you pay
What about in 42 though, in 43?
Well, we charged them to go. Well, they charged by the car, not by the person. See, and they could stay as long as they wanted to. But another thing interesting about that particular canyon, the Palm Canyon, was that you go through the valley and then you go up a little hill and you come and see all these 3,000 palms all dressed up with skirts on it, and they're beautiful. It's clear to the bottom. That's they don't do that anymore. They cut them all off. He shook hands. So that what happened was that just very unfortunately somebody dropped a cigarette and set fire to.
But we did hear that palm trees are so sturdy that they actually all but 3 survived.
Oh yes. Only 3 out of the 3,000. You see, when that started the draft, this is in a canyon, you understand, with a stream of water, and there was a draft there, and when it caught fire, well, it wasn't hardly any time they were on. Just went right up to the top, and it was just luckily that only 3 of them died.
Right, but they maintain water inside.
Yeah,
so they
but our sad part was we didn't have enough water in the stream to stop the fire, so they just put right up, and that was it.
Yeah, we've heard that as well. Do you recall the hermit who lived
Yes,
in the
I
canyon?
do.
Did you know him?
No
one has given us a name. Does he have a name?
No, he didn't have a name. But when you go, you have a hill. It looked like it would be a dam. I don't think it was ever a dam, but it looked like it was a dam. And you go down the other side, and you go about maybe a quarter of a mile, and on the right-hand side, there was quite a cliff on the right-hand side, and he'd be sitting up there about 75, 100 feet, sitting up there and watching the people go by.
What, was he a white man?
Yes, he was a white man. He had whiskers, and he was just a hermit, that's all. And it got so that by and by the tribal committee just voted that he had to leave, and so the sheriff had to come out. The Indians could do it too, but the sheriff came out with him, and they just told him he had to leave, and he left. How he lived up there, I don't know. But another interesting thing, up above him on the hills, you could see the wild horses when we came here. The wild horses, and they had mountain sheep too.
Lovely. Clara,
they call them Mustangs.
Did you take the children? Did they go through the canyons? Did they play in the canyons?
Oh yes, whenever we had guests from out of town, we always took them and showed them around the canyons, because that was an interesting thing for visitors to see in those days.
You all knew them very well. Yes, people had access to all of the canyons and could swim and fish, and it was really idyllic.
Yeah.
The really interesting another thing about Andreas Canyon is, as I told you, the Murray, but Murray, there's no road up there. You have to go by trail, no car. But Andreas Canyon is quite a stream all the year round. Comes down from the mountain back up there, San Jacinto, and back to Tockwitz. And there's a cave up there. And many years ago, if you whoever did it, you go in the cave and you look up on the walls, and there's all pictures of different animals been carved into the rock. hieroglyphics, I think they call
Sure.
that. You know,
Yes,
full of, a lot of people don't know that.
No.
They just look in and see it's dark. They said, "Oh, there must be snakes in there. I'm not going in." But there's no snakes in there because we
then-
have
then
policemen
the early,
that keep
you,
that.
you feel that the Indians
Oh, yeah.
early in
And then
that's their argument, yes.
early before we came here, the Andreas Canyon was named after a family who lived up in there, and canyon. A big storm came up, and it rushed down through the canyon and took everything in its path. And there was a family there, and their name were Andreas, and it just took it right out into the middle of the meadow down there and covered them up so far they never did find the house, none of the children, none of the family. And Andreas Canyon was named after the family, Andreas.
I see. Do you know about when this happened?
Oh, when I came here, there was a young fella, Andreas, they call him and Andy. He was on the tribal committee, and he was about 30 years of age. So it must have been at least about around 1900 maybe, or something, maybe before that, I don't know.
Yes.
You know, one.
Now you mentioned, just going back, the hieroglyphics in Andreas.
Yes,
Yes,
it's up in the sea, in a
Yes,
cave.
now that is something most people don't
No, they
aren't
don't know.
aware of it, because that would be
They
their
need a flashlight.
communication and their culture and their history.
It'd
that
be a
would
good
there.
idea if you're going to go
Yes.
inside to take a flashlight, a pretty good
Yes,
sized
because
flashlight,
that is not recorded,
because you
to
can
my
read it.
knowledge.
You can
Yeah.
read all that stuff on there.
That's
See,
their communication.
it's not very
which-
big.
yeah.
I imagine 20 people would fill it up, but you can look back up, and it's not very high. I would say about maybe 15 feet high in some places.
Does it look like symbols?
Oh yeah,
symbols
sure.
and-
You've seen them on.
Sure,
Yeah,
in France.
Maybe
and
look
so
like
forth.
horses. Some are
Yes.
cattle. Some are animals, and they're it's been made.
Yes.
It's been cut in now. Whoever did that, I don't know. We don't know for sure exactly when that was done, because, as I say, these Indians came over from 29 Palms,
Right.
but the Indians from Santa Rosa and Kauai came down here in the wintertime because it was
I
too
see.
cold up in
I
the
see.
mountains up there. See, it's pretty chilly up there at Santa Rosa. You know, that's on
Yes,
Highway
sure,
74.
and these were a
So
different band.
evidently some of those folks may have put those animals, pictures of those animals on the
Because,
wall.
of course, that all has meaning.
But there's a lot of fish up a little bit higher. There's a lot of trout in there, up in there. I've traveled down that stream for about 3 miles up, went around, came back down, right through all that brush, and a couple of places there were little cliffs that you had to go around, and that's beautiful. Now there's another canyon that may be interesting, and that's Tockwitz.
Mhm.
I don't know whether you want me to say something about
Well,
Tockwitz
we
yet.
will talk about the meaning of the term Tockwitz
Yeah.
in a while.
All right, let it go
and,
then.
It is an example, of course, of what we've done to our canyons, that we do not have access to Tockwitz, and that's a shame. I did want to ask you about, you came at a very important time in the 40s as far as the allotment issue.
Yes, I did.
You were kind of at the beginning, which proceeded to take 15 to 20 more years of the Indians actually owning their rights.
Yeah.
Do you remember some of the principles in this issue? The Lee Arenas case.
Oh,
was,
my, I'll tell
was
you.
the-
In 1922, the government decided that they wanted to give the allotments to the Indians because there was a very small amount of the Indians which was controlling the most profitable land in Palm Springs. They just took over, you know. Now they had a chief, and they'd have all the members. And when they came over from 29 Palms, they gradually took over where the town started to build on Indian Avenue and all. And they took over and started renting the land for $125 a year. That's all they got for rental there, and people would build a house or put a trailer or whatever you had. But it wasn't very long till it would appear that out of the, let's see, 40 and 79, that's 139. That's 139 people. And so some of the people weren't getting their share of the income from the land.
Yes.
So a lot of the agents came out in 1922, and they had a meeting, and they had some of the officials here in Palm Springs too, and they sat down and they tentatively set up the allotments for the Indians. Well, he never come back till 1919, and then he said he'd be back in about 6 months. The Congress would approve it, but he came back in 1929 again. And of course, a lot of things had changed. Some Indians had died and all, so they had to change the whole thing all around again. And they never got back again until 1949.
Let me ask you something, and Clara as well. Did you see a lot of poverty among the Indians when you were here in the 40s? Some of them evidently were living in very bad conditions.
Oh yes, but you want to understand, these Indians here were working for well-to-do people. That's what they had no other way of making a living except being housekeepers or working in gardens.
So you didn't see particularly
No.
people living out of cars, for example?
Oh, no. The Indians all had a place to live, and they had something to eat because, like he said, the women were maids for a lot of these people,
yes.
and the men were gardeners, and that because these big estates were being started, and they did that kind of work. So there was no really actual poverty amongst them.
Were you here? Did you arrive when the Leah Arenas case, the test case, was being?
Oh yes, I was here. I was here when Leah Arenas. Leah Arenas married a lady that was registered at a reservation in Paula. So he had his allotment, all right. You see, I should say to you, the allotment, when it was actually approved, was 2.5 acres of business, 5 acres of irrigated, and 40 acres of grazing. That made 47.5 acres.
Yes.
Now, Leah Arenas was way up there as far as, he wasn't, when I came here, he wasn't chairman. Lorene Wellness was chairman at the time, a lady. And, those Indians, well, I just say the other Indians that weren't very popular were the other Indians. They didn't have much income. But I gave them $50 a month subsistence, every Indian, when I came here. That was from the money we received from the bathhouse and from the going in the canyon and renting tribal land.
Right,
see.
but of course it was
You see,
small potatoes compared to what
yeah,
their
now
land was worth.
it might interest you to know that when I said that there was 31,000 acres plus in Palm Springs, only 3,100 was in the city limits.
Yes.
The others were out in the mountains all around. See,
Yes.
I want you to know that. So you couldn't do anything with it when it's up in the mountains.
Did you know Judge McCabe? Who
No,
played
he died before I came here.
Oh, he did?
Yes, he was. When I came here, his son had died because, that's why he came out here. He brought his family.
Because
his son had tuberculosis.
Such a principal in
Yeah, he had the boy had tuberculosis, and of course Nellie Kaufman was having tents out at the Mission Inn. Desert
Inn.
Well, whatever place was
Desert
that.
Inn.
Yeah. And so she had tents, and people would come out and stay in the summertime, and it was very good for her there. And then they had one daughter, and that was Pearl McManus. And when he died and all died, she fell heir to all that property.
You mean
Pearl McManus?
Yes, McCallum McManus. Yes,
yeah.
I see.
Yeah, she was a McCallum.
Yes.
And
Yes.
she's the one that
she
gave
was
a
not
lot.
related to Nellie Kaufman, however.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Do you remember Lawrence Crosley?
Lawrence Crosley, I should say I do.
Good.
Lawrence Crosley was very well established with Francis Stevens.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember him in connection with the Indians, though?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Now, Lawrence Crosley was a contractor for many places, and he hired a lot of the Indians, he hired a lot of the black men, he hired a lot of the white people to take care of the well-to-do people. He had a good business as a gardener contractor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he got acquainted with the Indians, and he would do a lot of things for them, you know, the Indians, when they need a little money, they come and ask you, could you loan me $5 or $10? That is. So Lawrence Crosley worked with him very closely, and he just took him under his wing. And so
Yes.
he had 2 daughters. And when Francis Stevens, that friend,
Stevens.
yeah, friend, Mr.
P.T.
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah,
Stevens.
he had 2 acres or 5 acres right next to the Ramon Trailer Park on Ramon Road.
Yes.
Well, now that trailer park belonged to John Williams. When he died, he willed the 5 acres to the 2 daughters. And when Lawrence Crosley died, then Claire and I was managers of the Ramon Trailer Park. And we worked by buying the regular trailer park area from John Williams, and we also bought the 5 acres that belonged to the 2 girls. So that's how I knew him very well.
Yes, he was supposed to have been a very enterprising and
yes.
compassionate man.
The Indians,
Yeah.
the Indians would go to him for advice, and he kept them posted. And you know, his main other object was he went around the desert and he gathered desert tea. He had a business.
That I
It was
didn't
called
know.
a desert. Well, yeah, desert tea. I know.
Yeah,
Just
I didn't
know
know
he did that.
That's interesting. Before we leave the Indians, because you've been involved in so many other things too, let me ask you about some key names that we hear all the time.
All right.
Were you here when Francisco Potencio was alive?
Sure.
And
His brother was alive too.
then you remember he was the last of the chiefs as such.
Yeah,
And-
no, they went to him. See, he had another brother that worked for me at the bathhouse.
Yes.
And then Francisco had a brother, and the brother had 2 daughters and 2 sons. Now the Potencios, the Potencios is the one now.
Yes.
That happened to be, was it when I get here, they were the mainstay with
Yes,
Lorraine
and well,
Wilmer.
he was the last apparently of the old
Yes, he was
old-time
yeah.
chiefs.
But,
And when he died, apparently his funeral was quite an amazing
well, it would
thing.
be because
Yes.
they would go to him. You know, he was almost
medicine man,
almost
too.
like a medicine man.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you remember when they burned the roundhouse when he died?
No, I
That
wasn't
was
here
then?
then. No.
Okay. What about his daughter, Flora Siva?
Well, she's still alive. She's
Sure.
up in the canyon.
Sure.
Flora, and she worked for me at the bathhouse as one of the attendants,
see.
attendant people that would go take a bath. And she had a sister too, and her sister died. But she married Cruz Siva. Now, Cruz Siva was enrolled at the in San Diego, Los Coyotes Reservation. He wasn't a member here.
Oh, interesting.
And he had a wife by the name of Virginia, and they had a couple sons and a couple of daughters.
You mentioned Lena Wellness.
Lena Wellness.
Yes.
Yeah.
Was-
Now, Lena Wellness, she was a very strong member of the tribe. I mean, they looked to her for a lot of information. She was chairman when I came here, and she was chairman a long time. And she was married to a fellow by the name of Joe Wellness, and they had 3 boys and 1 girl. And the little boy, name was Peanuts. He's dead. He died.
Was she
But
a
the other-
full-blooded? Was she a full-blooded Indian?
Oh,
Was she a full-blooded Indian?
Oh, yeah, sure. She's from 29 miles. But Joe Wellness was not a member of the tribe.
I didn't think
No.
so.
He had a sister by the name of, I forget her name right
What
now.
about Segundo?
Now, Segundo was a very strong Indian here. He had been back to Washington. They called him back there for hearings, and he had a wonderful memory. You know, the Indians don't write very much down.
Right.
But
That's
they
why I was interested in
Yeah,
that.
they had a
Those
hearing. They
hieroglyphics
had
you
a
were
hearing
talking about,
on
yes.
the allotments back in Washington, and several times he has gone back there. And Clemente Segundo is his name, and he was on the tribal committee, and he was a very, very strong, and then tribal man. Then he had a son, and the son followed him, and he became a member of the governing body too.
see.
He was a very strong fellow.
Was his son able to recite the songs and the histories
Oh no,
orally?
the Potentio. Now,
Yeah.
Joe Potentio, which was his uncle was Francisco. Whenever they had a funeral, you know, they would take a week for the funeral, and they called that the wake. You know,
Yes.
I don't know whether you know that or not,
Yes,
but you do. All
yes,
right.
But
Then
this
and
is
they
interesting
invite the
to have
Indians
you
from the other
describe
people
it.
to come here, and they feed them and everything. And he sings all the time. Joe Potentio sings the chants all the time. I don't know what he said, but he can sing for a whole week,
Yes,
and he could do it.
yes.
All right.
It's amazing.
After the week was up, they have another meeting which no one can go to, and it's a very, very closed meeting.
Mhm.
And at that time, they make a baby,
Like
that-
an effigy on that.
effigy, a baby like the face of the man that died. Now, for the first year, they control. They say in a way they control what that child does. It's not on its own. But after the year and they have their final, they let it go, and the baby's on its own. It goes.
Yes,
This
yes.
way. It's very
A
interesting.
lot of the rituals have not survived, but you can
No.
talk about some of those. And before we get to more, let me ask you about Willie Marcus.
Now, Willie Marcus was a very strong man. He controlled a trailer park right on Palm Canyon Drive today, where there's that big, beautiful building there.
Indian Avenue.
You know, that big building that's 5 stories high on Indian Avenue, right just south of Tockwitz, McCallum, McCallum.
Where
They just finished
not
it.
the oh,
There was a trailer park there,
yes, I know.
and he controlled that.
Blanking, yes.
And he was married to an Indian that was not in this from this tribe at all.
Are you
Yeah,
talking
Willie
about the
Marcus was.
Marquis Hotel?
But what
Yeah. The Marquis Hotel?
is that? What that hotel is?
Yes.
Well, it's right. It's right below, about 75, 100
Sure.
feet below Tockwitz.
Tockwitz and
Yeah,
Indian.
McCallum,
Yes.
because and he controlled that. That was quite an income for
Yes,
him.
yes.
But when he died, it turned back to the tribal. And while I was here, I was in charge of that reservation. I mean that. Excuse me, that Indian park,
Yes.
the trail park.
Clara, did you know any of the wives, any of the women in particular? Did you?
You mean the Indian?
The Indian women?
No,
Yes.
no, we didn't have any really social contact
Right.
with them.
And did they? You really weren't a part of their burials or weddings or
No,
ceremony?
no, we didn't. No, we didn't
couldn't
attend
go.
those things.
Yes.
No.
So basically, you know about this from what they tell you.
Yes,
and-
that's right.
Yeah, you did.
Several of the Indians, you know, they drank a little bit too much, and I can't tell you the name of the man, but I know him, but I don't tell you about him.
Okay.
But many times I've gone out when it was pouring down rain, and he'd be in the middle of the street dead drunk,
Oh dear.
and I'd just pick him up and half carry him home and knock the door and say to his wife, "Here's your husband," and that was it.
Yes.
You see, during those times, they weren't allowed to have liquor on the reservation. And what would happen, an Indian would start at Indian Avenue, he would head towards Palm Canyon, the white man with the liquor would start from Palm Canyon, and in between the liquor and the money change, one of them would be in a palm tree, and we
Yeah.
never knew, but we never prosecuted the people, the Indians, when they did those things. We didn't do it, but at that time when I was there, they weren't allowed to have liquor. But now, of course, they've had a lot of things change. They can have
Sure.
liquor,
Well,
and
they,
also
they now control
now
their
you
own fate.
if you get back to the Lotmans, I'd like to tell you something about the Lotmans. Maybe you got it down a little bit lower.
Yeah, let me just ask you a little more about the Indian lore, some of the rituals. Of course, the burials were very important, and you talked
For a whole
about
week,
the-
they had a wake.
that,
Yeah.
and you talked about the effigy. What about the Tockwitz witch?
Oh yes.
The name Tockwitz actually.
Yeah, the
means evil
Tockwitz
one.
Witch. It was
Yes.
very interesting. A lot of people don't know this, but it has to be about 10 o'clock at night. It has to be full moon, and you have to be either the corner of Ramon and Indian Avenue and Ramon. No, I mean not Indian. Well, you know, we have to be at the corner of Palm Canyon and Ramon,
Yes.
where at Coachella, where the Great Western is now.
Yes.
If you stand there and look towards the canyon at 10 o'clock at night on a full moon, you will see a perfect witch riding on a broom at least 300 feet long. She's out there in midair. And it's the most beautiful sight. A lot of people don't know that. And it's interesting to do that. But you only get it when it's a full moon and it's about 10 o'clock at night.
And
Because
Takwitz actually means is the
See,
evil
Takwitz
spirit.
is an Indian. Takwitz is the name for Indians is witch. That's a witch.
Yes. Did any of the children, your children, were they close to Indian children particularly?
Well,
Clara?
only in going to school. They
Yes.
all went to
Yes.
school together, and that was
Right.
really the only connection
And
they
if
had.
they shared athletic activities or whatever, then they were friendly.
Oh
and-
yes,
and- yes.
oh yes,
So
they.
was there much discrimination in school
No.
as far as?
No, in those days, why the Indians, the white people, or the black people, or
Sure.
any ethnic
Sure.
groups, they were all
Sure.
all
Of
children
course, the
together. There was
Indians
no
came here
problem.
first, so yes. Bill, if you want to continue with the allotment, the only other issue I wanted to ask you was the guaranteeship, the guardianship
Yeah.
rather,
Well,
that became so sticky and so.
well, here's what happened. When the allotments were finally approved in 1949, I think it was all published, and Indians each got, like I said, 2.5 business, 5 acres of irrigated, and 40.
Mhm.
And that was quite a valuable piece of land. But it would be equalize the value of the land for each one of the Indians. One of them wouldn't have, say, $10,000 worth of property. Now they only have 5. It was all equalized because the business land was on Indian Avenue. See, mostly between, I would say, between Baristo and Alejo. That was business property on the right-hand side. Now, the Indians didn't agree with the council that was business property, but they used it for business because they finally, as you know, they have control of what goes on the land, but the city more or less is working closely now with the Indians on the canyon up there because they want to do something on the canyon. But let's get back to allotments. Well, the allotments, each Indian got the acreage I was telling you about, but some of the Indians were miners. See? Now, a miner could not sell his land. It was held in trust by the government. But the ones that could sell would be the Indians that were of age. And also there was one restriction, and that was that the Indian had a certificate of competency.
Right.
See? You heard that before.
yes.
Because somebody would go in and they'd offer a tractor for 2.5 acres of ground.
Yes.
And you can't do that. So the office watched pretty well. Well, they decided that an Indian couldn't handle, like for instance, if there were 7 in the family and the land was worth $7 million, the Indians never had any education to handle $7 million. They wouldn't know how to do it. So they appointed a conservator.
Right.
Now he got a percentage of what the income was from the land. Of course, he talked with the Indians, and he'd have to get approval a lot of times. But
Were you? What was your role?
I
in
never had
this?
nothing to do with that.
That's what I thought.
No, I never had
Yes,
nothing to do
it
with that
was
at all.
The courts, and yes, and the business.
But it wasn't very long till we come to find out that the conservatories were getting more money out than the Indians were.
Yeah.
So they took it away from them.
Yes. It was
And
a
the
very
government has
sticky
back
issue.
control now,
Yeah.
see.
Very
But a lot of the land, the Indians have made leases. You see, there was tribal land in Palm Springs besides the allotment, which was never given to the Indian but the tribe. And like the spa, that's a long time lease. And I think where this hotel we were talking about a while ago,
Sure.
that is on tribal land. And of course, there's other places on the cemeteries on tribal land,
Yes.
and they
the
have tribal
airport.
land all around. The airport, though, I wouldn't want to say. You might check on this, but I think the airport The city bought the airport. I don't want to say for sure they did, because the government put so much money into that to make it an airport. I was here when they put in the runways, and they'd go up on a reservation and bring down gravel to make for the. They paid the Indians for rubbing right off of their own land.
On a lighter note, you have a cute story about the making of Lost Horizons in the canyon. The movie in the canyon.
Lost Horizons.
Lost Horizons was
Oh
the
yes,
movie where,
in two places. The first one we had was up in Palm Canyon Drive. When I first came here, Ronald Coleman and
Jane?
Victor McLaughlin,
Oh, okay.
they had part of the play was called. No, what did I say?
Well, Coleman
Anyway,
and Jane
under two flags.
Oh, okay.
That was the name of that one. And they took pictures up there. Then along comes Walter Pidgeon and Greg Garson with their director, and they wanted to film Lost Horizon part of it up there, see.
Yes.
And so there's a falls in Tockwitz, you know, that's 60 feet.
Yes, beautiful.
Well, they want to put a white horse up there.
Yes.
So we had one fellow here in town, Jim Maynard, which is he was on the police force for a long time, and he rigged up a cable with the pulleys and everything, and he put a harness on the horse, and they pulled the horse up the falls. And the last picture, whoever Coleman, he walked through the veil of the little falls up
Coleman
there.
and Jane Wyatt in Lost Horizon.
Yeah, all right, yeah.
Yeah.
And so he walked through that. Then they let the horse down. That cost about $2,500 just to put that horse up there.
Right.
Well, another film that was made there was called Madame Curie. That was made there too. Yeah.
Oh.
And now you see the people took really advantage of the Indians by dropping a lot of trash and tearing up things and everything. So they finally put a sign that you can't go up there anymore.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
But they get arrested. They go up
Sure.
there. They're a little careful about. See, that's still tribal land in
Yes.
places. But about another thing about Tockwitz is interesting is there's a dam up there where the water down at the falls. There's a weir. Now, if you know what a weir is, it's a weir that separates the water. That certain people get certain inches of water, and another get another. Well, this water at Tockwitz came down and came through the tennis club.
Oh.
It belonged to Mrs. McManus.
Right.
All right. So, and then they would put trout in there, and the people would fish and get the trout. You'd come on down and come down the arena at Andreas and went into a little ditch down below the highway and then went on down the desert. But they always had some water coming down, but not too much. But it was a kind of a little hazard down that ditch in the middle of the road. There's always the water there.
And
But they
when
cut
when
that out
there were
after a while.
Great floods. There were
No more. There's no more. There's no more
really
fish.
a problem. Yeah.
So that was the problem there, and now they're trying to figure out to put a dam up there, but it looks like it may cover up some historic graveyards.
Boy,
So
yes.
we haven't got very far on that.
Yes.
And the Indians are not going to allow them to put water over a grave unless they move the grave.
Back to the beginning of our history, yes, which happened.
Now
in
there's another
Labarona.
canyon. This is Canyon Tachiva. Tachiva happens to be on an Indian reservation, but it's a half a section, and they own the west half, and the white people own the left half, the east half. So there's a dam up there, so the water comes over and comes down. It goes down by Alejo and on out
Yes.
when they have a lot of water. Now about Chino, it'll surprise you about Chino. Chino was an Indian reservations up in there, and Culver Nichols. In fact, when he got through, he ended up with a couple of sections, and one of those you go through his place. But I was on the planning commission, you know, and I was on the council too, and I've seen pictures where it was taken 10,000 feet up in the air, and you can see that cone coming out, going where you go up the tram, and over a period of maybe millions of years, the debris and the rocks will all come down and fill that up in that cone. Now they've changed it right at the foot of the mountain. They changed it, and it goes down to the left and comes out at a bridge just north of where you enter Palm Springs, the city limits. It's up there now. But
when
that
you
was
say they changed it, you mean
one of the flood control people.
Man-made, yes,
because
yes,
the
to
water
control
would
that,
come on
yes.
down over that cone and go
Yes.
right down through. So what we got to be careful
Our
now, and
precious
what
water, yes.
what the flood control are interested in and to talk with is that if we ever have a big storm, it would wash out that road and maybe houses on both sides.
Yeah.
So what they're trying to do is to get a dam up there to kind of protect it so it won't. They can take care of that
Yes.
flood water.
Yeah.
But
Well,
the Indians haven't agreed to that yet.
Yes,
All
yeah, that's all.
but they're working it down below Farrell and all down in there. They're building beautiful homes right alongside the stream now.
Yes. So they
Beautiful.
have to.
There used to be a hermit lived in that canyon too,
Oh, really?
right off of Indian Avenue.
Oh.
He'd come uptown every day and he'd have
Very
a little.
civilized hermit.
Yeah, well he had a long gown on and he'd have a little sack and you'd see him come up and he had long
Was he
whiskers.
an older?
Huh?
Older hermit?
Yeah,
Or-
he was
or
a hermit.
hippie?
He was a hermit, and he'd go around and pick up stuff and take it home. But he lived someplace down, not very far off of Indian Avenue, and he lived. I don't know exactly where he lived, but he lived in the rocks down in there. But they finally, he
Yes.
disappeared too.
Clara, Bill mentioned some of the changes in the town when you first came versus certainly now, such as the proximity of animals that you could see on the mountains and the wild horses. Is there anything else about the town, the shopping, or anything else that you remember that was so different? Was it a small village atmosphere?
Oh yes, it was a small village. Now in the summer times, the drugstores, there would be just one. I think there was 3 drugstores in the wintertime, but in the summertime they would take turns. There would be just one drugstore open a month,
Oh dear.
and
Yes.
you just had that because the people didn't stay in the summertime then.
Right.
Now with the air conditioning, when the children, school was out on Memorial Day, and sometimes if the hot weather would hit us, they would go maybe for half days for a couple of weeks before Memorial Day,
Oh,
because the schools and your homes that didn't have air conditioning,
Yes.
and you just closed up. But of course now that they have air conditioning, why
So
they
you remember
stay.
the time when people really, even the 40s, did not have air conditioning as you know, as
Well, as they
obviously-
call it now,
Yes.
then they started with what we call the
Then-
swamp coolers.
Right, right.
You had-
right.
you
But
had
if you had a
those.
humid day, then
Yeah,
you were.
they were just as bad
warm,
as
yes.
the humidity,
Yeah.
but that's.
Yeah.
But
And
it changed different now. We had one big chain store in town. The Safeway was down on Palm
Yes.
Canyon Drive.
Is that where you would go to do
Yes,
your marketing?
mostly. And then there were several little independent
Yes.
shops, grocery stores
Yes.
along Indian Avenue, so that
Where
we
did you
did
do
actually-
your shopping? Mostly
Well-
at Safeway?
Well, at the Safeway mostly, or
Yes.
or at the little shops along,
Yes.
whichever one I happened to go to. Of course, if you wanted to go and really buy fruit now, like in summertime for canning fruit and that, why we'd go to Banning,
Uh-huh,
and we'd pick
yes,
up our fresh fruit and that in Banning
Yes.
and have it.
yes.
But of
Did
course,
you go into Los Angeles those days much?
no,
Well,
not
you were from Riverside. You
Yes.
probably went back.
went to Riverside more or
Yes.
less. Because he was still, although here at Palm Springs, he was still under the supervision of the Riverside office. So he would go to Riverside.
Yes. Well, your family
after-
was
and
there
my
as
family
well.
was there, yes.
And there were summers when you stayed in Palm Springs.
Oh, yes. Hmm.
But there were summers when you traveled as well.
We had a travel trailer, and we traveled, took
This
our.
would be a good time to ask Bill when you actually got into several other businesses.
Yeah.
So did you retire from Indian
Yes.
service?
You see, in 1945, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, 1945. I thought, and I thought that the government wasn't being exactly, I wouldn't say fair, but I didn't agree with what they were doing, and so I resigned what you call without prejudice.
I
In other
see.
words, that means to say that if I wanted to go back in the Indian service, I could. It
Very
wasn't
good.
prejudice, but I just decided that and then I had a good chance to go into the real estate
Mm-hmm.
business, which I did, and I worked with Culver Nichols and 2 other people that were in there, and
And you were on one of the early city councils.
Oh yes,
Do
I
you
was.
remember your fellow councilmen?
Yeah, I
and
was
your
on.
women?
I was on the council for 4 years, and I was on the planning commission for about 8 or 9.
Good for you.
And at that time, I was manager of the Rancho Trailer Park. And you see, if you're on a council, you got to be in position to go to meetings during the day, and
Isn't that the
you
truth?
you
Yes.
can't work for a fella very well unless he's in sympathy with what the project is to get off. Because
Unless you work for yourself.
yeah, well, not for myself, but we always met with Charlie. I was on with Charlie Farrell when he was
Fun.
president.
That's
Yeah,
fun.
and we would meet at the Racket Club every Wednesday.
Particularly fun.
Yeah, we had lunch there. See,
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah.
that's where we meet together.
Was he as flamboyant or
Oh,
interesting
my.
a man as...
The girls would come in. The girls would come in, and he'd run over and hug them. He knew them, especially Joan Crawford. He knew her very well, you
That's a
know.
great story.
He was married to Virginia. She was an actress, you know, but she died later. But he's still living, you know.
Yes, he
you know,
is.
but he's way up in his years.
Yeah.
We got along all right because, you know, see, I was the first part of it. I was the Indian agent, and I was working very close with the city, with the Indians, and so, and also then when I gave up the Indians, and I was in charge of the Rancho Trailer Park.
I see.
And,
so you knew the
so I
Indians
worked
and
pretty
you knew
close.
real estate.
Yeah, and I had a real estate broker's license in 1924 in Riverside. Yeah, and when I came out here, I just kept it with me, and I sold several reservations and sold some property and all like that. But Culver Nichols and two of the fellows, we joined together called a BAB, Barney, Bill, and Al. Bill. That's what Barney, Al, and Bill.
You have two cute stories. One is about Francis Crocker and the airport.
Yes, when we first came here, Section 14, from where the middle of that reservation, that section. Let's see, what would that street be? Would that be Tuckwitz, McCallum? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right.
the middle, yes.
Starting at the corner of Indian Avenue, no, Palm Canyon Drive, Sunrise Way, the east, the airport took off, planes took off northwest, and they were the American Airlines, and it was just a small plane,
Yes.
two-motored, and that whole area was vacant. Imagine, whole area north there was
Yes.
all vacant, and this plane would take off and land over Francis Crocker, and I can imagine in the afternoon and evening and night he was a little perturbed about not only the noise but the danger. So finally they decided the government would put up some money, and they put the airport out on Section 18. That's a lot of money out there
Yes.
tied up in that place.
You also have a Cornelia White story.
Yeah.
She lived
Now
across from the bathhouse.
Cornelia White was here a long, long time. She, Wellwood Murray, and also McCallum and Francis Stevens. I mean, those folks here were early, and Francis, Mrs. Kaufman. And she had a place right across from our bathhouse, a home on the corner there. And I got acquainted with her. She's a very nice lady. And she said, I want to show you something. So we went in the backyard, and she lifted up a gate, and there was about 10 steps. And she said, let's go down the bottom of the steps. So we walked down the bottom of the steps, and sure enough, there's a little puddle of water there, and it was warm, about enough to wash your feet only. And I said, well, that's something. Well, she said, do you think I could ever be able to develop that and make it into a proposition where I can make some money? I said, I don't think so. I said, I have never heard of anybody else in the area here that has hot water. We're the only ones that have it. And that we've been down 600 feet and we didn't hit bottom, so you're just not onto the mainstream, and so you just don't have anything. You got to be satisfied to wash your feet in it.
Yes,
So.
she had a nice Japanese bath.
Yeah. But a lot of the water from the bathhouse just went all to waste. It went down and went through the Palm Springs Trailer Village, went out into the desert. Just
Yes.
Just wasted for years and
Yes,
years and years and
yes.
years and years and
Wow.
years. I used to drink the water out of the pump, 2 cups to a glass of water before I would go in to take a bath. But I very
What did it
seldom.
taste like?
Well, it was smooth. It's slimy, like
Oily, probably.
oh no, 106 is all it was.
No, oily.
Oh yeah, oily. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right, oily.
sort of.
Yeah, and but when you'd go in and then take a bath, lay in there, and 10 minutes was all you'd want to be. Well, you just all break out with perspiration, and when you get out, you just feel fine. Oh,
Clara, did you?
No, she.
No,
Never
I never did take one of the baths.
No, I don't know if she
Yeah.
ever took no.
And the
no.
kids?
Never appealed
There's
to
one
me.
other thing I didn't tell you the other day that's interesting. As you go out of Palm Springs, up at the Gateway Estates,
Mhm. Certainly.
up on the left-hand side, up on the side of the hill, is a big rock.
Mm-hmm.
And the Indians say that when you go there, if you listen, it says, "Come on back, come on back, come on back." That's the truth.
And enough people certainly have done that.
Yes.
Another thing was very interesting. Many years ago, when they opened up Palm Springs, they didn't have a road down here. They used barrel staves and laid them on the sand for the cars to come down to Palm Springs. And they have a side to pass somebody, but you had to stop and wave because it would be maybe maybe half a mile somebody be coming. So they'd wave and you'd get off to the side. It was
Somebody
like
would have to-
a train passing another train
Exactly.
to go by like that. See,
Yes.
there wasn't any road.
Yes. Well, this
And you
was
get stuck
very
on-
primitive.
And I've been stuck in the sand on plenty of time, but I got to learn that you just go get a little sagebrush or mesquite, put on the hind wheels, and you get started.
Well, our people who are coming in now, I've seen them on the sides of the road, and they don't know that trick. That's a
I
good,
was stuck.
good old
You know where
trick
the
to
Lutheran
know.
church is?
Certainly do.
I stuck right there at that Lutheran church out in the sand before that was built.
Yeah.
Oh, did I have a job to get out of that?
Yes, but that's interesting.
Yes.
Let me close with Clara. Start with William and close with Clara. You were involved in the community church
Oh, sure.
greatly, both of you. I realize that. And who was the pastor? At the,
Dr. McCartney.
Bertram.
No, Dr. McCartney was the minister when we came here.
And who were were you involved with in a ladies group?
Well,
some of the other women
well, I
in
was with
community
the,
church?
I was in the ladies' work there too, but mostly with the Sunday school.
Mhm.
I was Sunday school superintendent there for quite a few years,
you.
and helped, of course, with the young people's work. Having young people in our home, we were particularly interested in helping and working when people work. I also belonged to the Palm Springs Women's Club,
Mhm.
which was very active in those days, as it is active
Yeah.
these days.
Yeah.
And so that was our main social life.
And your children as well. You mentioned that is what activities they were involved
Yes,
with in those
mhm.
early days.
Yes,
The community church.
yeah.
Yes.
Now, when I came here, the church was the first. There's 2 churches there, you know. There's 2 churches. The church that was there originally when we came, it was built by Charlie Burkett and a few other people there, and Lincoln, who had the department store here, and it cost $35,000, which was wonderful. They could build that for $35,000. That was the first church we came. Then a little bit later, we outgrew that, and that became a church school or Sunday school,
I see.
and we built the other one on the other corner. Well, I was on I was a board of trustees, I was an elder, and I was on the building committee when we built the other church. See, the other church there cost about $750,000. That's a big church.
Quite different.
Well, that
And,
shows you the change.
big one
at that
church.
time. Yeah.
And
That would have been about what time when the main church was built?
I can't
50s?
tell. I can't tell. How much?
In the 50s?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Easily. Yes.
And Brainerd, Fay Brainerd from Estes Park, he was hired as manager at $1 a year to see the building of that, and we raised the money. And of course, Harmel donated quite a share of the money to build that church. And that was the Presbyterian church when we came here. Of course, now it's known as a community church. It doesn't belong.
Of course, Dr. Blackstone was here when the new building was built.
He was a pastor there for 27 years.
I read that.
Yes. So you have that from somebody.
Yes.
And but it's a beautiful church. I tell you, it's a beautiful church.
Good.
And it's well built because it has special rafters. It's made with laminated girders. In other words, they glue together about 7 or 8 boards, glue them together, and that becomes the girders. It's stronger than actually steel girders.
Interesting. Yes.
And it goes right up like that, goes over, goes down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you say that was, you're talking about wood?
Yes.
Wood? Because one of our local architects does believe wood petrifies and does very well in the desert.
It's almost just like that because it's made under pressure down in Los Angeles. They bring it out.
You've been involved in a lot of building in your time, whether it was churches
my son's
and
an
schools
architect in town. Wendell architect, graduated from USC.
That's right.
And so we've been very active in a lot of building. When I was in the real estate buildings, I built 4 houses here in Palm Springs. Yeah.
So you've
down
been
in the south
involved
end of town.
And lots of
Real estate
activities.
too.
Yes.
I used to rent an office from Mrs. McManus, right beside where the 76 station is on Palm Canyon and not Andreas.
For your closing remarks, would you like to describe Auntie Pearl as you?
Well, I tell you, she invited me once. Yeah, she invited me. Of course, her husband come and collected the rent, McManus. And I didn't see her too much, but one time she decided that she wanted to talk to me, so she invited me up to her apartment, which was by the tennis club, on the 5th floor. So I went over there and met her and talked to her, and she wanted to talk to me, and she said that she thought I was being fair with the Indians and what I was doing. And they were very glad to have me out here. And so she just wondered sometime if she ever needed a manager or something, would I be interested? And I said, well, if I could be of service to you, I would.
She certainly recognized talent
she didn't
when she saw it.
And she was a very smart woman.
Yes, she was.
And
good businesswoman.
very strict.
Yes.
And of course I knew Mrs. Nellie Coffin very well too, and the two sons.
Right.
I knew them.
You knew them particularly well in all your activities.
Well, like I say to people, the cemetery we have here, the one cemetery is a small cemetery. It's full. Nobody can get in the one.
Right.
So they had to open up another one out on Ramon Road.
Right.
So I said, very few people die in Palm Springs. That's what I said.
Well, they die in Palm Springs.
And
they may not be buried here.
When I retired, I could have lived any place I wanted, but I wanted to live in the south end of town where there's no wind, and where the sun shines about 325 days a year, and everybody thinks property is not expensive. Well, it wasn't when we came here. It is now, but it wasn't when we came here. See, don't put, you clip this off, but we only paid $52.50 for this completely furnished. Do you know that?
I didn't click it off, but we will.
What I just said.
That gives you a bit of history. Yeah. I want to thank you both. Unless you have something else to say about the early years. Thank you very much, Clara and Bill Veith, for your stories and your perspective on certainly on the Indians in those early days, and real estate and living in Palm Springs and being almost 90 years old in the south end of town. Thank you, Veith.
Now, if you clip that.